Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back or welcome to my podcast, Rewire to Inspire. I'm your host, Jessie Brown, and I am coming on here with a little bit of anxiety. I'm not gonna lie. But as always, I'm still very excited to be jumping on here. And the reason that I want to jump on here for episode number 197 in this headspace is because anxiety is the theme of today's podcast. If you missed my last episode, number 196, How to Know If You're Triggered, I definitely encourage you to check out that episode. I've kind of been trying to recognize what I've been feeling, and am I sharing organically from my heart how I've been feeling deep down, beneath the surface level, beneath social media, beneath your perception. What are the things that I'm struggling with? As somebody who has a mental health background, who has a lot of tools in my toolbox, these are still things that I deal with and that I deal with heavily on a day-to-day basis. And so knowing if you're triggered is something that is going to benefit you at any point in time in your life. And so if you haven't checked out that episode, I definitely encourage you to. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about something that I know that I am not an expert in, or be in a place where I can really preach the other side of it. But the reason that I'm talking about it is because it is real and organic and something that I'm dealing with, and that is the topic of social anxiety. I encourage you to ask yourself, do you deal with social anxiety? Do you maybe deal with social anxiety and you don't even know that you do? You don't really know what it is that means for you, what that looks like, what that feels like. But I want you to know that if you deal with social anxiety, you are definitely not alone. I was doing research this morning and I learned that 7 to 13% of the whole world's population deals with social anxiety. And I would bet that that number is actually astronomically higher. This would be self-reported incidences. And so we all experience social anxiety to different verities, right? Like some of us experience it a little bit heavier than others. Some of us have more tools to help equip us. Some of us are at different ages. But nonetheless, social anxiety is something that affects all of us. And I know for me recently, it has been affecting me more than ever. Even before recording this podcast, I noticed my anxiety has been worse. And I've been asking myself, why has my podcast been feeling different? And I was going through the list of things and I'm like, it's not because I don't want to do it. It's not because I'm not passionate about it. Finally, I landed on it. And the answer was, I have a lot of anxiety around the perception of others. And this is new for me. And the reason after doing digging that I landed on where it's coming from is because when we experience a feeling that is negative, we avoid. And so what I mean by that is because every time I come on this microphone, I was ignoring the fact that I was feeling anxious. I wasn't validating that. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And now I'm in a place where I'm like, I wonder why I feel so anxious when I get on the microphone. And it's because of that suppression of emotions that I've been feeling for a really long time. I'm also someone who isolates myself. I tell myself I don't want to go out. I don't want to go into social interactions. I don't want to do these things. And I've told myself the narrative in the story that it's because, I have other things to do or that's not in alignment. And in some degrees and areas, yes, that's true. But in a huge part of that equation is that I'm just super anxious. And because I'm someone who is quote unquote very outgoing, or maybe I was, it was very hard for me to recognize that, maybe you are dealing with a little bit more anxiety than you're giving yourself the validation for. And I never realized how heavy that's been affecting me and how that's been trickling into my mental health in a day-to-day basis, in my relationship with people, my relationship with work, and it's all boiled down to social anxiety. And so I really wanted to talk to you guys about this today because I know that I'm not alone. Again, that 7 to 13%, but also doing further research, And I always hate talking about COVID on my podcast because I know it can be a triggering thing for people. I know it's something people don't really want to talk about anymore. But I think that it is very important to talk about the effects that it had on us in our brains, in our mental health, and how that affected us. And a study came out that indicated that the pandemic increased social anxiety and depression by 25% for folks. And we'd be very naive if we didn't look at that data and that research with a very, very, I guess, curious mind. We can't be neglectful that it impacted us, that it affected us. And I think when we tell ourselves a story that something didn't affect us, all we're doing is suppressing the emotions that are associated to it. And so because I've been denying that the pandemic affected me or that I have social anxiety, I've been avoiding situations without realizing it. My actions have followed that belief even though I didn't realize it. And so I've made myself, slowly over time, I've formed this new version of myself that is very fearful of social interactions. And I never realized it. And so today I want to talk about some ways that we can overcome social anxiety. And my point in the beginning of being, I'm not an expert or I'm not on the other side of this to talk about it, I do know the neuroscience behind it. And I do know the facts behind it. And the reason in which I want to lean into this topic is because I am a living example of somebody who deals with social anxiety very deeply. And I want you guys to know that just because you look at certain people and you would paint a picture that, oh, they have it all figured out, or they could never be that, or, they're not anxious or overwhelmed. Oftentimes, we're very, very good at hiding how we're feeling. And a lot of it also boils down to we make things worse in our own consciousness about ourselves. So times that other people probably didn't realize that I was anxious or feeling awkward or didn't know what to say, I labeled myself as such. And we start to internalize and beat ourselves up. And so I want to talk to you guys about some different ways that we can overcome this and we can work towards improving our social anxiety and feeling safe again to be social and to know that it's okay, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and it's okay if it's awkward or feels awkward. And the truth is other people are probably feeling it just as much as you are, but if we don't talk about it, we think that it's just us. I went to an event on Friday. It was a social event all about mental health, and my heart and my brain were so excited to be there. So excited, so honored to meet so many amazing people in my community that are such advocates for mental health. And I couldn't get myself to go introduce myself to certain people because I was like, what if they don't care? How am I gonna start this conversation? I don't know what to say. What if it's awkward? What if I look stupid? And I tell myself all these things to convince myself not to go have that conversation. Whereas I know pre-pandemic Jessie would have just walked over and said something silly and started a conversation. And so I think we also start to compare ourselves with a past version of ourselves of like, well, I used to be able to, why is it so hard now? And so I can't reiterate enough the importance of self-compassion, being kind to yourself. The first thing that I wrote down is we have to validate that isolation affected us. We have to validate that 2 years roughly of being in some form of isolation. And I know it's dependent on your work and what you did and where you lived, whatever, but just as like a big, bold statement, roughly 2 years of our life had some form of control over them. And so our brain adapted to that through something called neuroplasticity, which we talk about all the time on this podcast. It's why my name of the podcast is Rewire to Inspire. Rewire meaning rewire our brain. And the way that our brain rewires itself is through something called neuroplasticity. And so we need to validate that 2 years of our lives were affected. And neuroplasticity adjusts to your situations, right? It's normal for your brain and your anxiety to adjust to social circumstances, which is a very positive, cool thing, right? That's what it's made to do. It's made to adjust you to your circumstances to keep you safe, to keep you going. If we didn't adapt to certain situations, things would be very overwhelming. And so we adjusted to the point though where our brains started to associate other people as threats, social interactions as threats, not being by ourselves as being something overwhelming. We got very used to just being by ourselves in our home. That was a safe space, and going out meant feeling overwhelmed. And this is the part that I really denied for myself, is because just because we didn't realize that it was happening, or maybe you didn't have that belief, doesn't mean that your brain didn't adapt as such. Because when we're going from all this time spent outside of our home, doing all these things, going to gatherings, going to movies, going to the mall, doing whatever around other people, and then we just stop, our brain is like, hey, what about that do I now need to identify as a trigger, as an overwhelm, as a danger, so that I can adapt as to why we are now just inside all the time. And so our brain does all these things to protect and serve us. It does it to keep us safe. The reason that this is so, I think, forgotten about is because the pandemic was 4 years ago. But the thing about trauma and our brain is it takes roughly 3 years for us to really see those impacts. Which makes sense why 2023, 2024, all of us are like, why do I feel like this? Why do I feel different? Why can't I connect? Why do I feel awkward? Why am I so depressed? Why is my mental health shit? Why do I not want to do anything? Why am I not driven? Why am I not creative? Why am I so stressed? Why am I so sad? Why? It's because we're not validating, and it's not talked about the effects that it had on us as human beings. But what's also not talked about is the fact that through exposure and education and self-validation and hard work, we can overcome that, and we can work on that, which is why I'm talking about this in the first place. I would not be talking about this just to say a statement of, yeah, now you're socially anxious, like, congratulations, figure it out. No, there's a way that we can work on this and we can improve this, which is so empowering, and is what I keep telling myself. There's an opportunity that came up for me tonight to be on a podcast, and I have told myself every excuse in the book of how to get out of that. And I'm like, oh my God, there it is. You don't not want to do it. You're just anxious about it. You're worried you're going to mess it up. You're worried you're going to say something dumb. You're worried you're not going to know what to say. And so you're avoiding it. And then I came back to when I was a coach. I was a one-on-one coach. And yes, in some ways that was just not in alignment, but I'm like, the reason you stepped away was because you were socially anxious. You were so worried about not knowing what to say that you ran away. And that was a very hard pill for me to swallow, because I'm like, I often tell myself, it's because things are in alignment or not in alignment, but it's like, how many times in your life or lately can you reflect on for yourself of wanting to deny, to stay home, to isolate? And you can think of a legitimate reason. It's likely because you're just anxious. And again, you need to get to know what anxiety feels like for you. For me, my stomach is just like, bleh. It's like when you go over a big hill in a car and your stomach kind of drops. It just feels like that constantly. I know I'm anxious when my thoughts are quicker than normal. I know I'm anxious when I'm sweating like crazy. I sweat like crazy. And it's so embarrassing and I hate it so much, but it's also like, your body's in panic mode. It's freaking out. It's in overdrive. You're sweating more. And so I encourage you to get to know what your signs are of social anxiety. Once you get to know those things, validate them for yourself. And by the way, this isn't like a 1, 2, 3 episode of how to overcome anxiety. These are just general things that we need to do and assess and ask ourselves if we want to improve our relationship with social anxiety. But the first thing really is we need to validate and understand that neuroplasticity adapted and shifted our brains to be fearful of social situations. But the same as it shifted into being fearful, we can shift it into being comfortable again. Which leads me into the next thing that we can do, which is we really do need to start exposing ourselves. Like that podcast tonight, me not wanting to go on it, in a way I kind of have to push myself to do it. Because I know that the only way that I'm going to begin to feel comfortable doing these things is to push myself. Because every time we're fearful of something and we listen to our brain and we don't do it, really all we're doing is giving it validation and reason that it is correct, that those things are fearful, that we do need to avoid them. But when we push past that resistance and we choose to feel uncomfortable, it allows us to shift our thinking. It's something we used in social work all the time called exposure therapy. One of the best ways to overcome anxiety is to expose ourselves to the thing that makes us anxious. Now, we don't want to do it so quick and so fast that we are overwhelming our system. I talked about our window of tolerance in the last episode about triggers. If you're overwhelming your ability to cope, you are, per definition, traumatizing yourself. And so you need to find little ways to expose yourself. One small way that I've been doing this lately is giving somebody a compliment. Even just giving someone a compliment, as much as I want to say it, I feel like I'm going to throw up because I'm so scared about what they're going to say. Like, that's just the extreme in which my anxiety has gotten. And I have not validated for myself until this week. And so lately I've been doing like a 1, 2, 3, and then just like word vomiting what it is I want to say. And the other day I was at the gym and I was in the sauna, and this girl walked in and I loved her sports bra. It was one of those like one shoulder strap sports bras, super cute. Anyways, I'm like, I like that. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you tell her? And I sat in the sauna for probably 5 minutes preparing myself for how I was going to tell this girl I liked her sports bra. And I told myself, before you get out of the sauna, when you're about to leave, do a 1, 2, 3 and just say it. And so that's what I did. And shocker, she said thank you and smiled. And that showed my brain like, okay, it's not that scary to talk to other people. And we just have to do that over and over and over and over again. Not ever knowing when exactly the turning point will be. The same as we don't know how many exposures led to us being anxious. It's hard to say exactly how long until that feeling will subside. But what I can promise you is the longer that you keep avoiding, the more you are reiterating that belief to yourself. We will stay stuck in that spiral mindset if we do not push through it. And so we have to expose ourselves to social situations. Acting social is the key to shifting our brain into being social again. I encourage you to just take a moment for yourself right now and ask yourself how this is landing for you. If I listened to this podcast even 2 months ago, I'd have been like, I don't have social anxiety. I am such an outgoing person. And that's when we really have to notice how our ego and our identity are getting in the way and are also being kind of helpful at getting us to avoid things. Because I told myself a story that I don't have social anxiety, I would let myself off the hook by avoiding things of just being like, well, I just don't want to. Again, that's not in alignment. Well, I have other things to do. And it's like the voice beneath that was, I'm so scared of what people are going to think of me. I'm so scared that I'm not going to know what to say. And I had to validate for myself, the more that I continue to work from home and I don't go into the office and I avoid going out places and I avoid connecting with people, I'm like, I've been building this foundation for months without realizing it. And it's something that can make us feel really shameful about ourselves because we're like, well, it shouldn't be that hard to just go into your workplace. But it is when that internal dialogue is saying, you're not good enough. People are going to judge you. What if someone strikes up a conversation and you don't know what to say? I'm so awkward. I'm so stupid. And we're so mean to ourselves. And so that's really the last thing that we need to do to overcome social anxiety is noticing the thoughts that we're having and telling ourselves internally. How can you begin to shift your conscious thoughts and be aware of them? One thing that's been helpful for me is flipping the conversation to the other person, asking them questions and getting them to talk, because then when they're talking, it allows me to just take a second and relax and be like, okay, this isn't so bad. I kind of get to like get a read on the person, calm myself down. And so one thing that can be helpful, like I said, is turning the conversation onto the other person, focusing on the people around you instead. When you have social anxiety, that inner voice and dialogue becomes so loud. It's next to impossible to ignore because it's screaming at you. And so the more that we can shift our attention externally to us, the easier it is to help calm those thoughts down. I've talked about it so many times, but you need to notice your thoughts. Are they actually accurate? I guarantee you, you are not as awkward as you think you are. That is like my number one thing I tell myself is I'm so awkward. I've never had anybody ever tell me that I'm awkward. But we think that in our mind because we are hyper aware of ourselves. We're hyper aware of how we're standing, how our clothes feel on our body. You know, I know when I get anxious, I can feel like even sometimes in my podcast, like you can see me moving and like doing things because I get anxious. My fingers, I'm always like doing something with my hands. My partner always tells myself, I can tell, or tells me, I can always tell when you're anxious because you're fidgeting with your fingers. I do this all the time. I just like rub my hands together. I play with my ring. I play with my nails. I'm just like, like always fidgeting with something. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And I'm like, okay, now that I'm aware of it, it's time to do the hard work to overcome it. We need to validate that social anxiety exists for a reason. It exists because we don't want to get hurt. It exists because we want to self-protect. And it's easier for us to stay by ourselves, stay home, stay in our safe spaces than it is to go out and feel uncomfortable. But what if feeling uncomfortable isn't actually a bad thing? How can we love ourselves through being uncomfortable? How can we support ourselves through being uncomfortable? Validate for yourself, like, hey, next time I'm uncomfortable, it's because a part of my brain and my body is just trying to keep me safe in this moment. How can I thank it for trying to keep me safe while also validating that you are doing the hard work to push through it? Again, do it in small little nuggets. Go to the mall and say hi to somebody. Compliment somebody on something. Smile at the person when you're walking by. Try to keep your head up. Try to make eye contact. Little ways. Maybe you have like 3 go-to questions that you say to a stranger when you see them. Something that you can kind of use as a crutch. Know that it's okay. You're doing better than you think. You're way less awkward than you think. But I'm also here feeling so put on my heart to just say, we need to work on this as a society. All of us have gotten so used to hiding behind this thing, hiding behind our phones and being fearful and anxious of other people. Yet when we're behind our phones, we got everything to say. We're not anxious or overwhelmed when we're behind a keyboard. But then when we get face to face or on camera or whatever, we're like, I don't know what to do or say. That's because we need that in-person connection. We are wired to have connection with other human beings in person. Okay, and so I hope you know that I'm sending you so much love as you navigate and go through this, and know that, again, I can't say it enough, you're not alone. I have felt so alone in these thoughts and feelings because I'm like, nobody gets it. My God, if 7 to 13% plus of the world population deals with this, I'm like, girl, you got many social anxious friends. So let's just like find each other, help each other be less awkward, and help each other get through it. And if you see someone striking up a conversation with you, we're trying to say, hey, give that conversation just a chance. And let's work on just being kind to each other and having compassion of knowing that we all deal with social anxiety, again, to different verities, to different severities, and in different ways. And so a lot of it just comes down to pushing ourselves a little more to get outside of our comfort zone, showing our brain that it's safe to interact with other people, and being kind to ourselves as we navigate through that. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of me. And I hope that we can just continue to do the work to improve our self-love and improve our relationship with ourselves and improve our relationship with the world and with other people, because I think truly deep down, we are all needing more social connection. We are needing each other, and the only way that we can work towards that is by exposing and getting ourselves uncomfortable so that we can feel comfortable again. So thank you guys so much. I'm sending you all the love in the world, and I look forward to chatting with you all on Thursday. Bye, you guys.